So we're in chapter 1, verse 8. Perek Aleph Posuk Ches. And last time we left off in a suspense because the sailors, in quest to know why the storm was directed only to them and not to any other ship that was going by, so the sailors cast lots, and every lot that they cast fell on Yonah. So they knew it was definitely Yonah that was the cause for the storm. And they turned round to Yonah and they started asking him why he thought the storm was going on. So let's see inside. Pasuk Ches, verse 8. Vayomru Elov, and they said to him, Hagida no lonu, tell us now, Ba'asher lemi hara hazois lonu, in regard to whom has this calamity befallen us? Ma malachtecha, what is your trade? Umeayin tove, from where do you come? Ma artzecha, what is your land? Ve'emi ze am ota, and from what people are you? What were they asking him? So Rashi explains to us. They were asking him, what is your trade? Have you done anything wrong in your trade? Have you cheated anybody? Have you stolen from anybody that you are deserving of such a grave punishment, for which reason we have to all suffer? Where do you come from? Maybe it wasn't you personally only that did something wrong, but rather it's your entire vicinity that has done something wrong, has sinned, and you're just one of them. You're just part of them. Rashi says that they said that maybe you didn't sin personally. In other words, it's not that everybody sinned, but you didn't sin yourself, but that your people around you sinned, and therefore you're being held accountable. From which nation are you? Well, maybe it wasn't the people who themselves, just of your vicinity. Maybe it was your entire nation that sinned. And when they asked him the last question, that was the last question. From which nation are you? So they wanted to know what was wrong, what went wrong. The Gemara tells us, there's a Gemara in the tractate of Kiddushin. And the Gemara says, it's fascinating, it's a Mishnah. Actually a Mishnah and a Gemara afterwards. And it talks about various trades, various jobs that people do. What is a good trade, what's not a good trade, which trade are you more prone to go wrong in, which trade are you more prone to be good at or ethically. And the Gemara says that sailors are mostly chasidim, are mostly pious. Sailors is a job that will bring a person to piety, because they are always at least in those days, they were always in trepidation. You didn't know. You set a sail, and it was really putting your life on the line. And, it constantly, when a storm would come or when something would happen to the ship, and you were always in peril, in real danger, and you always had to look heavenward. You always had to pray. You always had, that was part of your job, really, was hope and prayer. And therefore, sailors were always considered people who were more prone to be pious. Although in modern in modern thinking, sailor is a very gruff job, a very the language used by sailors were not necessarily the nicest. But the point was that you see immediately these fellas. We've got to remember they weren't Jewish. We were told, Rashi tells, bringing from the Midrash, that there was a representation on the ship from all the 70 nations. There was a real UN gathering of all the nations of the world on the ship who were not Jewish. And they immediately associated the fact that something was going wrong once they determined who it was, they immediately associated it with the fact that the person had sinned, had done something spiritually wrong, and therefore was being punished. This is their immediate conclusion. Quite an interesting thing. And first of all, none of them believed. We don't say that any of them this was already previously, that the captain of the ship woke up Yonah and said, "What are you sleeping? Well, pray to your God." They were all praying. Number one. Number two, they were praying to their gods and to no avail. It didn't help. And then they came to the once they came to the conclusion it was Yonah by drawing lots, which was in itself a spiritual thing. They drew the lots and it came once, twice, and three times, and then they determined, that it was Yonah. They immediately came to him and said, "What have you done wrong? This must be a punishment." Pasuk Tes, verse 9. Vayomer aleihem, and he said to them, Ivri onoichi. Yonah said to them, "I am an Ivri. Ves Hashem Elokei hashamayim ani yorei, and Hashem, the God of the heavens, do I fear. Asher osa es hayom v'es hayabosha, who made the sea and the dry land." He answered them that I am an Ivri. We'll get to the meaning of the word Ivri in a second, but loosely it's translated as Hebrew. But he answered with them, with this answer saying that he is an Ivri, he is a Hebrew, really answered them on all their questions. He answered them about their nations. He answered the nation that he's from. He answered where he was from, because that was going to be from Israel. And he answered them also that he was honest, because he carried on saying that I fear the God of the heaven that made both the sea and the dry land, and therefore you have no reason to fear, you have no reason to suspect me that I have done something wrong ethically in business or in my trade. So he eliminated any of the sort of regular questions that they had asked him. Now, the word Ivri, to describe a Jew, is really the earliest term that we have in describing a Jew. It appears a number of times in the Chumash. It appears regarding Yosef, where the butler went to Pharaoh. Remember the story. And he said, there was a young lad who was an Ivri, who was a slave, and he deciphered my dreams. So Yosef was actually on more than one occasion referred to as an Ivri. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he came to Pharaoh, and he said, the God of the Ivriim has appeared to me, has appeared to us, and said to let my people go for 3 days to the desert. Hashem Elokei ha'Ivriim, the God of the Ivriim. So it's loosely translated as Hebrews, but the actual word Ivri doesn't have that real meaning. And by the way, the word Jew, or in its Hebrew phrase Yehudi, as we know, that was only referred a name that Jews got. That was only a name that they got after the exile of the 10 tribes, when Jews were residing in the area of Judea in the land of Israel, and that's when the term Yehudi, Jew, coming from the word Judah, Judea, that's when that came into motion. That's actually also biblical, because in the Megillah you have Ish Yehudi, a Jewish man whose name was Mordechai, and always the Jews are named Yehudim, in the whole Megillah. The Megillah being after the destruction of the first temple and after the exile of the 10 tribes, when Jews became known as Jews, as people from Judea. But the actual word Ivri, has a number of meanings, or has a number of explanations of why it was used. Rashi, going in the Chumash, explains that Avraham was called an Ivri. Actually, the first person who was called an Ivri was Avraham ha'Ivri. He was called Avraham the Ivri. And Ivri comes from the word Aver. Aver means the side, or the other side. Avraham came from Aver HaNohor, from the other side of the river being the Euphrates, the river Pros, the Euphrates, and Avraham was from the other side because he lived on the other side of the Euphrates than where he went to, which was who we crossed over, and he went to the other side of Mesopotamia, and so he was known as the Ivri. That was the simplest translation of the word Ivri. The Midrash gives an understanding of the word Ivri, which is from the other side, but not in geography, but from the other side in ideology. Avraham was from the other side, as everybody else in the world then. Everybody else was pagans, was idol worshippers, and Avraham was preaching monotheism. So he was from the other side, and therefore his descendants, who all stood for what Avraham stood for, all became known as Ivriim, as these people who were Ivri. Now there's an interesting, if you look at this verse, it's an interesting way how Yonah refers to Hashem. He says, I'm an Ivri, and Hashem, God, the God of the heavens, do I fear, who made the sea, both the sea and the dry land. So he mentioned that Hashem makes both the sea and the dry land, and this is the obvious meaning behind this, is they were at sea. And he was trying to explain to them that Hashem has jurisdiction both over the sea and the dry land, and which leads up to the fact that he was running away from Hashem, so to say, going to sea, but he makes them realize that God is everywhere and therefore controls the sea, what goes on at sea as well. But how does Yonah refer to Hashem? He refers to him, Hashem Elokei Hashemayim, God, the God of the heaven. Hashem, the Lord of the heaven. Now, this is not in the commentaries over here, but it does bring to mind a verse, or a couple of verses, in Bereshis, in the beginning of the Torah. Remember the story where Avraham goes and sends his servant Eliezer to go bring a wife for his son Yitzchak. And he makes Eliezer swear to him that he's not going to take a wife from the daughters of Canaan, from the local girls. They were very improperly conducted themselves. They weren't good people, the people around Avraham. And Avraham instructed Eliezer that he should go to a place further away where Avraham's own relatives lived, and over there he should find a wife for Yitzchak. And he makes Eliezer swear. So he over there, when he's talking to Eliezer, he tells him that swear to me by the God Elokei Hashemayim, the God of the heavens and the God of the earth, that you will not go and take a wife from the local girls and so on. Then, a little later on, Avraham refers to Hashem. Avraham tells over the story of how Hashem brought him out of his father's house and led him. He mentions to Eliezer that the same God who took me away from my father's home and led me through all of this, he will be the one who's going to escort you and help you in finding a wife for Yitzchak. This is what he's encouraging Eliezer on his mission. And in those verses, Avraham says, Hashem, the God of the heavens, that took me away from my father's house, and that led me, and that swore to me he will give me this land, he's encouraging Eliezer. He uses only the term, the God of the heaven. So Rashi immediately picks up. Why? When he's making Eliezer take an oath that he will take only a wife from Abraham's family, over there he says, the God of the heaven and the God of the earth. And then when he tells the story of how Hashem took him out of his father's house, he only says the God of the heaven. Says Rashi that when in the stage that Avraham was talking, that Hashem had taken him out from his father's house and had led him and had promised him the land, at that point, before Avraham had disseminated and had spread the fact that Hashem exists and the oneness of God in the world, so Avraham was alluding to, and he was saying, at that time he was only Elokei Hashemayim. At that time he was only the God of the heaven, because he hadn't become, so to say, the God of the earth. The earth, the people on the earth, hadn't come to recognize the one God, hadn't come to know or even understand the concept. So therefore he refers to Hashem at that time as the God of the heavens. Then when he's speaking to Eliezer and making him take an oath, what kind of God is he referring to at this time? Here already, after Avram's gone through a lifetime. He's 140 years old, and he's gone through a lifetime of spreading and of educating people. Now he says, now Hashem is the God of the heaven and the God of the earth. Now, if you again, it's not something that the commentaries say, but over here, what's Yonah saying? He's speaking to these fellows who we learned a few verses before. Each one of them was calling to his own God. They were idol worshippers. And so Yonah says, Hashem Elokei Hashemayim, God, the God of the heaven. But then he immediately emphasizes, and he's educating them, the God that I believe in, the God that I know to be true, is the God of the heaven, but he makes the dry land and he makes the sea. He creates everything. So if you want, it could be that Yonah is taking this idea when talking to these people, and he's saying the God of the heaven, because for these people he was the God of the heaven. It was a God that they didn't know, that they weren't familiar with, that a being, a master controller that they hadn't realized had maybe even existed. So he's telling them it's the God of the heaven. That's how he's referring to it. But then immediately pushing in that he's the God that makes the dry land and makes the sea, and he controls everything on this world. So it could be that these two things have an association. At least the words themselves immediately call to that association. Pasuk Yud, verse 10. Vayiru ha'anoshim yira gedola. The men were seized with a great fear. Vayomru elav, and they said to him, Ma zois osisa? What is this that you have done? Ki yadu ha'anoshim, because the men knew, ki milifnei Hashem hu beireach, that it was from before Hashem's presence that he was fleeing. Ki higid lohem, for he had told them so. Now, although Yonah had not explicitly, in other words, although the verse has not explicitly said that Yonah told them what had happened, but the verse says it as a matter of a fact. That Yonah had obviously told them what he was up to over here. And one of the Meforshim, one of the commentaries, the Radak, he fills in the gaps. He says what happened was, he says, Yonah said, I fear the God of the heaven that made the sea and the dry land. So they asked him, so if so, you're such a pious guy, you're such a devout fella. So what do you mean? So the tempest, the storm was because of you. So you got to have done something. So he says yes. So he says that I'm a prophet, and I received an instruction from Hashem to do something, to go to Nineveh and to make the people do teshuvah. I didn't want to go, and therefore I escaped to the place. I ran away from the land of Israel, which is the place where you're most prone, it's most likely to receive prophecy, because I didn't want Hashem to speak to me again about this, and so I'm running away. Oh, so this is the people were struck with great fear. And it may be that this was a different fear, because we learned already, actually I said before, that the people were very fearful. Over here the fearfulness was a little more. This was already something that struck them as being supernatural. And now they knew what it was, and so a great fear gripped them, as if to say, this is something unbelievable, this is something incredible. I was thinking, actually, I don't know if he actually told them why he had ran away. Because remember the last time, the whole underlying factor, which we're going to examine much more towards the end of the book, because over there, we're going to see Yonah's frustration with the fact that they did do teshuvah, and how Hashem explained to Yonah in a very interesting way that there was nothing to fear. But Yonah was very nervous and didn't want to go and ran away from Hashem, something that no other prophet in history ever did. Why? As we remember last time, because he didn't want Nineveh to do teshuvah, and then it would look extremely bad for the Jewish people, who after so many prophets and so many warnings and so many admonishments, were still grappling with it. We're still not coming out of their wrongdoings. And over here, if the people of Nineveh would do teshuvah, it would look extremely bad. I don't know if he actually told this to the people on the ship. Whether it was, it probably wouldn't have sounded so politically correct, or, they were at their dyer's end anyway. They're at their wit's end anyway. He may as well spill the beans. Whatever it was, but he definitely told them that he was running away from Hashem, and the Pasuk says it as a matter of fact. He had told them that he was running away from God's presence. Verse 11, Pasuk Yud Aleph. Vayomru elov. So they said to him, Ma na'aseh loch? What must we do to you? V'yishtek hayom me'aleinu, that the sea subside from upon us. Ki hayom hoylech v'soyer, because the sea grows stormier. So they were extremely surprised that he had done something like this, to run away from such a God whom they had been introduced to for the first time, who controls everything. Then how are you doing this? And so the next thing that they asked him, the inevitable next stage, was to ask Yonah himself what to do with him. Because if he was a prophet, and if he was somebody who warranted such private treatment, albeit being a rough one, but if you're somebody who God will make a tempest, a storm for you on this ship, on no other ship, and the whole ship will rock and will be threatened to overturn just because of this person himself must know what to do in such a situation, especially because being a prophet. And the verse finishes, Ki hayom hoylech v'soyer, because the sea grows stormier. And one of the prophets says that, the commentary says that they said to him, listen, we have no more time to consider. You got to sometimes imagine the scene. The storm is going. They're holding on for dear life. And they said to him that there's no time now for us to start figuring out and to experiment and start thinking what we should do. You tell us what to do, and we'll do it. You can imagine the feeling of what was going on. Verse 12. Vayomer aleihem, and he said to them, So'uni, pick me up, v'hatiluni el hayom, and throw me into the sea. V'yishtek hayom me'aleichem, and the sea will calm down for you. Ki yoidea oni, because I know, ki b'sheli hasar hagodel hazeh aleichem, that's because of me that this terrible storm is upon you. So he gave them the worst of options. They were thinking, we'll see soon, they were thinking, they were devout people, they were good people, we'll see, as we've seen, they were good people, we'll see further, they were pious people. They were thinking, fine, the guy is running away from God's presence. What do we need it? What do we need it for? What's the best option? Go back. Turn the boat round and go back to Yaffo, where they set out. Get Yonah to get off the ship, let him disembark, and we'll go on happily. That would be the natural thing. But Yonah told them no. The only way that the storm is going to subside and you're going to survive is if you throw me into the sea. And we'll see soon, the next verse, that they tried disobeying Yonah. They tried rowing back to shore. And it wouldn't work. Yonah knew what he was saying. Yonah knew that he had been doomed in this sense. And the only way that the storm is going to stop is if he is thrown overboard. In fact, the Midrash tells us that Yonah himself knew that this was going to happen, and that he went onto the ship with the clear knowledge that he was destined to die. Whether he knew it prophetically or he knew that this was the consequence for what he did, but he knew he put his life on the line in order not to that something shouldn't nothing should look bad for the Jewish people, and the result that may come out of that, he said, I'm out of the picture. The consequence for this would be maybe drowning, will probably be drowning. Didn't have a problem with it. The Midrash says, Yonah went with this intention in mind. And the Midrash equates it to the story in the Chumash with Moshe. When the Jews served the golden calf, and Hashem said to Moshe, let me destroy them and we'll make you into a great nation. Had it with them. Moshe said, if you're not going to forgive them, then I'm out of the picture also. Wipe me out, says Moshe, together with them. So much was the depth of his love for his people. And the same thing was Yonah. Yonah knew that this was going to be the consequence. He knew that there was not going to be any way if he went away, if he withheld his prophecy and disobeyed Hashem, and that would be that. That was the kind of consequence he was going to occur, and he was ready for it. So the next verse, verse 13. So we see the men were very reluctant. Vayachteru ha'anoshim lo hoshiv el hayabosha. The men rowed hard to return to the shore, but they could not. Because the sea was growing stormier upon them. So that didn't work. So they were now at this terrible question of whether they should actually listen to Yonah. It's a terrible situation to be in. As terrible as the storm is, it's a terrible ethical situation. And you'll see how they grappled with it. The next verse, Yudalet. Vayikru el Hashem, and they called out to Hashem. Vayomru, and they said, Ono Hashem, please Hashem. Al no noivda benefesh ho'ish hazeh. Let us not perish on the account of this man's soul. Va'al titein oleinu dom noki, and do not reckon it to us as innocent blood. Ki ato Hashem kasher chofatzta osiso. For you, Hashem, as you wish, so you have done. So they immediately now call out to Hashem. They've been convinced, so to say. They threw lots and it fell on Yonah. Yonah told them that this is what the deal is. They tried rowing back, it didn't go. Yonah knew what he was talking about. So they had been shaken up enough that had understood, at least minimally, that this was the truth. This is really what was going on. And they called out to Hashem, and they asked that they should not be convicted. It should not be put on them as a sin for overthrowing this person, because they had no other choice. What other choice was there going to be other than listening to Yonah? They went through the other choices. They tried going back; it wouldn't work. So they have to listen to Yonah, but they were extremely apprehensive and unsure about this move they were going to do. Another explanation is that this was not so much of a prayer, but rather of an explanation of what they were doing. They said, "Listen here, God. It's not really working any other way. We have to do this. What use is it going to be if we all die because of this one man? It doesn't make any sense. If we overthrow him and then we're all spared, it's much more. It makes much more sense. It works much better, doesn't it? Now we know in Jewish law that's not so simple, right? It's a question. I don't know about this case particularly, but you're not allowed to give away one so everybody is saved. But the point is, at least, that this was their rationale. They were rationalizing what they were doing, and so it wasn't so much of a prayer. But according to these commentaries, it was rather an explanation and a rationale, telling God, listen, this is technically how it has to happen, and you understand, you understand, God. Pasuk Tesvav, verse 15. Vayisu es Yonah, and they lifted up Yonah, vayitiluhu el hayom, and they heaved him into the sea. Vayamod hayom mizapoi, and the sea stopped its raging. The Midrash tells us that they were reluctant and they couldn't bring themselves to do it, so they again made the test. It's not in the actual Novi, it's not in the actual text, but the Midrash tells us they put him in till his knees, and the storm subsided. They took him out back onto the deck of the ship, the storm began again. So they tried a little more, they put him in up to his navel, and they pulled him out, and the same thing, the sea stopped when he was in the sea, and started again, it started raging again when he was out. Thus they put him into the sea till his neck, and the same thing happened, the sea subsided, and when they took him back onto the ship, the storm started again. So here they had no choice, so the last time they heaved him and threw him into the sea. Now the people were totally convinced and were seized. They were overtaken with the fear of God. Verse 16. Vayiru ha'anoshim yiru gedola es Hashem. And then the men feared Hashem greatly. Vayizbuchu zevach laHashem vayidru nedorim. And they offered a sacrifice to Hashem, and they took vows. Now all the commentaries say, it's a little bit hard on a ship to make a sacrifice, and if they had animals with them, the idea is that they promised to give sacrifices. There's a difference of opinion, actually, of whether their promise was to give sacrifices in the temple, in the Beis HaMikdash, or the idea was that they were simply going to make sacrifices, which was prevalent in all the nations, or any of the nations that served the one God or other foreign gods, that they made sacrifices. And the question revolves around, it's an interesting question of what kind of sacrifices were given by non-Jews in the temple. There were sacrifices which could have been given. The question is, in the way that the verse puts it, the word zevach. The word zevach usually refers to a certain kind of sacrifice which wasn't given by non-Jews in the temple. But so there's a difference of opinion of whether they promised to give it in the temple, or they were just regularly going to put up an altar anywhere and make sacrifices. The same thing, there's a question of what it means that they took a vow. Took a vow to do what? So Rashi, taken from the Midrash, says that the vow meant that they were going to convert. They were done. They said, this is the faith, this is what it is, and we're going to convert. Other commentaries say no, the idea was that they were made vows to give charity or to do good deeds. Usually the word neder for a vow, the word for a vow in Hebrew a lot of times means when a person vows to do something, you take on a vow, many times it means to do a good deed. It doesn't mean you're going to change your whole persona. It means you're going to give tzedakah or whatever it is. And so there's a question of what exactly these people meant by doing. The Midrash actually makes record of the fact that they all marched up to Jerusalem, and their wives and their children, and brought everybody, and they brought sacrifices in the temple, and they converted once they made it back to shore. That's how the Midrash describes it. So Yonah's in the water. We can't keep him in the water too long. Let's go to chapter 2. Perek Beis, Pasuk Aleph. Vayaman Hashem dog godol livloya es Yonah. Hashem designated a large fish to swallow Yonah. Vayehi Yonah b'mei hadog shloisha yomim u'shloisha leilos. And Yonah remained in the fish's belly for 3 days and 3 nights. Now Hashem prepared a large fish. Obviously, the meaning is that the preparation was to the fact that the large fish should be there when Yonah goes in, because you can't survive in the water for that long, and obviously the fish had to be there, right there, to swallow Yonah as soon as he was thrown in. The Midrash tells us that Hashem had designated the fish from the 6 days of creation. In the 6 days of creation already there was in mind that this was going to happen, and there needed to be a fish that would miraculously swallow Yonah alive. And as the commentaries say, this was a double miracle. Number one, the fact that Yonah survived in the belly of the fish. Our sages say that it was in the very same fashion and way that a fetus survives and lives and grows in the womb of its mother. It can't breathe on its own. It can't obviously eat and anything else, but it survives without oxygen, without anything that we need for survival. Once we're born, it survives and it lives in its own in that way in the womb of its mother. Say the commentaries, it was in the same fashion. Hashem converted Yonah, if you want, into the survival of a fetus. However, the double miracle was that he still remained with all his faculties. He still remained with the fact that he was able to think, and we'll see soon, to pray, a beautiful prayer that Yonah prayed. So this was obviously a double miracle. Much to the contrary of a common opinion, it does not say anything about a whale. Jonah and the whale is a nice tale, and excuse the pun, but it doesn't hold anywhere in the verse. It was a large fish. We're not told what the nature of the fish was, and that's that. Verse 2, Pasuk base. Vayispalel Yonah el Hashem Eloikov mim'ei hadoga. Yonah prayed to Hashem, his God, from the fish's belly. It says that Yonah prayed to Hashem, his God. Of course, God is God. To Hashem, his God. So the commentaries say that Yonah at this time, is after going through this and being in this situation, felt that God was his God, for better or for worse. For better because Hashem had made him a tremendous miracle. He was a living miracle. For worse, because of the situation. He had run away, the whole thing. But he felt close. Sometimes if you're in when you work with somebody and there's bad times or there's good times, but you feel close to the person. You're in there. You're bagged in there. And the same thing, Yonah felt God was his God. He was receiving direct treatment from Hashem, literally with Hashem's hand, and experienced the miracle. Was experiencing a miracle. So he prayed to his God. Hashem was his God now. The line was open. Now what do you say in the belly of a fish? Well, you'll see. You'll see how. Verse 3. Vayomer, and he said, Korosi mitzoro li el Hashem vayaneni. I called in my distress to Hashem, and He has answered me. Mi beten sho'ol shivati shomata koili. From the belly of the lower world I cried out, and you heard my voice. And we're going to study the prayer of Yonah, and in general, you should know, whenever there's a prayer in the Tanach, it's always in very different language, and a lot of times complex language. When there's a song, it is that way. It speaks in poetic language, and sometimes very cryptic language, beautiful language, but there's a lot of understanding that needs to go with it. The same way when there's a prayer, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, that it's written very poetically and with great meaning invested in every word. The theme of the prayer of Yonah is actually nothing about his flight away from Hashem, and nothing about the reason for his flight away from Hashem's presence. It's rather a deep recognition of the hand of God that has brought him in this circumstance, and a deep hope and trust that Hashem would eventually bring him out of the belly of the fish, and he would once again walk the land of Israel, once again visit the temple, that he would be brought out of all of this. Very fascinating. According to most commentaries, he doesn't address at all the reason for which he was in this circumstance. He rather focuses on the fact that he's here, the fact that he's been spared, and this hope for getting out. He speaks, as often is when prophets would speak. He speaks of the future as if it already happened, and that is a mode of trust that it will happen. So, when the prophet came and he said, God will send you tremendous blessing. So often he said, God has sent you, blessing and sustenance and everything when you will listen to his voice. They say it as if it happened already. That's the poetic or prophetic way of speaking of security in the future, as if it had already happened. So he says, I have called in my distress to Hashem, and he has answered me. In other words, trusting and having the real hope and knowledge that Hashem will answer him and bring him out. Why was he so sure? He had to have been. Because why would have God spared him if he had cast him away? This is, again, another thread. It's going to go through the entire prayer of Yonah. Yonah has seen and heard a miracle. He has survived and is surviving in the most astonishing of circumstances. He survived his time in the sea, however long that was, and now he's gone into the belly of a fish and is living and is surviving. Obviously, God is still interested in me. He still wants me, and that's amazing to him. Just to mention, I forgot to mention before, but Rashi tells us that Yonah went through a little bit of a roller coaster, even as far as the fish's belly is concerned. He was swallowed, the Midrash tells us, in a male fish that had a lot of room. And he was in there. And then he didn't pray yet. And the Midrash says he was spewed out from a male into a female who had the eggs, everything going on in its belly. And that was far worse. That was far less comfortable. And so he was again at his wit's end, and he started to pray. This is the Midrash. This is what the Midrash says. So he calls from Hashem. What do you say? He calls from Hashem to Hashem from the lower world. Now the word that the pasuk uses, mi beten she'oil. It's from the belly of the grave. That's literally what it means. Mi beten she'oil, from the belly of the grave I have called out, I have cried out, and you have heard my voice. He was referring to the belly of the fish as his grave, as a place which was deep down. It felt like a grave, squashy and deep, and that was the criteria. So he felt like it was a grave, and so he's called to Hashem from the very depths, and Hashem, he trusts and he knows will answer him, having spared him all this time. It's fascinating. There's a commentary called the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel, Don Yitzchok Abarbanel, was the rabbi at the time of the Spanish expulsion, and the rabbi of the Jewish people who led the Jewish people out of Spain in 1492. And amazingly enough, he wrote many books of tremendous commentary on the Tanach and on the Haggadah, and books of Jewish philosophy and Jewish argument with Christians. He wrote an amazing amount. He has a commentary on the Book of Jonah, as well as the entire Tanach. And in his commentary to Jonah, he says he understands this verse totally different. He says that this verse is a reference to Jonah's thinking back to his own history. And you can imagine, if he was doing any thinking, he was thinking about his life. We remember that we learned at the beginning, the Gemara says, the Gemara alludes to the fact, that the Midrash says it clearly, that there was a story with Elijah, that Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, resurrected a boy of a woman, a widow, who he was staying at, and that this boy was Yonah. So the Abarbanel says that this verse, Yonah is thinking back to his childhood, to who he was. And he says that I called to Hashem from the belly of the grave. He literally meant the grave. He was dead. He was clinically dead. And Hashem had performed a miracle that through Eliyahu Hanavi that he was resurrected. So he's thinking back to who he was. I called Hashem from my anguish, from my distress, and he had answered me. So he doesn't understand that he had answered me to be prophetic In other words, speaking about the future as if it were to be past tense, as we just explained. Rather, he understands the answer. He understands that God had answered me. He understands it literally in the past. God answered me in the past. He resurrected me, and from the belly of the grave, he resurrected me. He had heard my voice in the past. This is who I am. He thinks back to himself. Verse 4, Pasuk Dalet. You cast me into the depths, into the heart of the seas. V'nohor yuseveveni, and the river whirled around me. Kol mishborecha v'galecha olai avoru. Your breakers and the waves swept all over me. All swept over me. The heart of the seas. He says that Hashem threw him into the heart of the seas, means into the very depths. He apparently was in the heart of the sea, in the real depths, in the real deepest part of the sea, and he was right down there. So he says, this is the deepest place that Hashem threw me into. Verse 5. Va'ani omarti, and I thought, nigrashti mineged anecha, I was driven from your sight. Ach, however, oisif lahabit el heichal kodshecha, I will gaze again at your holy temple. I will still gaze at your holy temple. Yonah says, when I was thrown into the sea, I thought I was dead, and that I had been banished from your sight, from your eyes. But seeing that I have lasted through all this, seeing that you kept me alive through all this, gives me the knowledge and gives me the trust that I will yet again walk in and see your presence in the Holy Temple. I will yet again walk Jerusalem and go into the temple and experience godliness. So you see where his prayer is going. He was spared, and this is what amazed him. And so he was thanking and he was hoping for the future. Verse 6. Afofuni mayim ad nefesh. The waters encompass me to the soul. Tohoim yuseveveni, and the deep whirled around me. Suf chovush l'roshi, the weeds were tangled about my head. So he had been surrounded with water. The depths surrounded him. He was submerged in the depths, and the weeds had surrounded his head. So the commentaries explain like this: the fact that he says that the water surrounded me, encompassed me till the soul. It means till I was ready to go, till his soul was going to depart. He was surrounded with water up to the point of drowning, but then he was saved. Now the fact that he says that the weeds or the reeds, the suf, had surrounded his head, the simple explanation is that the reeds or the weeds, they often, when the fish swim, so their head gets caught. They catch themselves in the reeds, and the weeds, or the seaweed that floats around, and you could see it all over the top of the fish. It's covered in seaweed. So he considered himself as being part of the fish, that the weeds were on top of him. The weeds had surrounded his head. Basically, he's really in the sea. He's really floating through the sea. Rashi, quoting the Midrash, says, it's quite interestingly. Now, although obviously this was in the Mediterranean Sea, because that's where Yaffo is, that's where the port is, and it was in the Mediterranean Sea. But in a way, according to these opinions, the splitting of the sea, the Kriyas Yamsuf, in the time Pesach. So many opinions do say that it was in what we know today is the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds, which is not the Mediterranean Sea. And however, he says that Suf Chovush L'Roshi, the Suf is around about my head. And the Midrash tells us is that the fish, obviously through subterranean water, and there's water that was somehow connected to the Mediterranean Sea, had gotten Yonah to the point of where the Jews crossed the Yam Suf, where the Jews crossed the Red Sea. And it says that Yonah, the fish was at what it says. The Midrash says the eyes of the fish became transparent, and Yonah saw this place from under the water. He knew, obviously, that he was in the place of the Yam Suf. And when he says the Yam Suf is above my head, he literally meant the Suf, the Sea of Reeds where the Jews crossed. The Midrash says he was in that place. He was at that point. Verse 7. Lekitzvei horim yoradati. To the bases of the mountains did I sink. Ha'oretz b'richeha ba'adi liyolam. The earth, its bars against me forever. V'ata'al mishachas chayai Hashem Elokai. Yet you lifted my life from the pit, Hashem my God. So he went down to the bases of the mountains. There are mountains underwater, right? So he said he had been submerged to the base of those mountains. He literally hit the seabed in the deepest place, because if you go to the bases of the mountains that don't stick out from the water, some of those mountains are higher than mountains on the earth, right? And so you go down to the base of those mountains, he literally was submerged right down to the depths of the sea. And he says that the earth, it was barred from him. The earth, its bars against me forever. He thought that he would never see the earth again. He would never come out of this. But Vata'al Mishachas Chaya Hashem Elokai, Hashem lifted my life from the pit. Again, speaking in past tense. He was still in the pit. He was still in the depths, and he said that God would definitely get him out of this, because he had brought him till here, and he would definitely bring him out. It's the prayer not of thanks after the fact. Yonah's prayer is a prayer in middle of the fact. Many prayers are when the story ends and they lived happily ever after, right? Then it's a prayer of thanks and a prayer of hope for the future. This Yonah's prayer is the prayer when he's right in the middle. And the inspiration of the prayer is that he says, God brought me till here. And he's at the very depth of the whole experience. He doesn't know what's going to be next. But he says, God brought me till here. And he brought me here with miracles. I am certain that he's going to lift me up. He's going to bring me out and onto the dry land again. Verse 8. Behisate for lai nafshi es Hashem zachorti. While my soul was faint within me, I remembered Hashem. V'atovo yelecha tfilosi el heichal kodshecha. And my prayer came up to you, to your holy temple. Again, and my prayer came up to you. How does he know his prayer was accepted? Again, he's speaking in past tense, and it did. It means he's certain that his prayer is going to come up and reach God, so to say. His prayer is going to be heard, is going to be heeded, and he's going to come up, because he's gone down to his life was, his soul was faint within him. His soul almost flew out of him, and yet he was still alive. Verse 9. Meshamrim havlei shov chastom ya'azovu. Zealously guarding their utter futilities, they forsake their kindness. Now who he's talking about is talking about the idol worshippers, people who don't worship God. He was saying these people zealously guard their futilities. But they forsake their kindness. He means that the one who does true kindness to them, they forsake. They forsake their own kindness, their own good. People who zealously guard silly things, futilities, are forsaking their own kindness. And as he carries on in the next verse, Va'ani, but I, b'koil toida ez b'chalach, with a cheer of gratitude will I bring offerings to you. Asher nodarti ashalema, what I have vowed, I will fulfill. Yeshu osol Hashem, for the salvation which is Hashem's. He says, I, however, I believing in Hashem, I will bring offerings to Hashem. When I come out of this whole ordeal, I will bring my offerings, literally, into the Beis Hamikdash, and that which I vowed. Obviously, Yonah had vowed to do good things if he were to get out of this situation, and that which he vowed he was going to fulfill, because salvation is to Hashem, because Hashem is the one that gives salvation. Other commentaries, so Rashi brings an opinion that says that he was actually referring to the sailors, that these people who zealously guarded for the futile gods. He had just been through an experience with the sailors. The sailors had screamed to their gods, nothing helped, and they had all come to the realization of the one God. He says, so those people who guarded their futilities, he was referencing himself to them. They were leaving their own kindness. The ship was almost going to break, and they zealously were guarding their sillinesses. And they came out of it, so to say, and they through Yonah, and he and I will keep my promises to Hashem, and I believe in the one God. So they had also come out of their own shell, of their own idol worship through Yonah, and Yonah remembers this what had happened there, and he ends because Yeshu osa la Hashem, because salvation, real salvation, only comes through Hashem. And verse 11, Yonah's prayer is heard. Vayomer Hashem ladog, and Hashem spoke to the fish. He addressed the fish. Vayokei es Yonah el hayabosha, and he spewed out Yonah onto the dry land. So after 3 days and 3 nights, Yonah offering this prayer, he was spewed out. The Midrash tells us that the fish had swam with Yonah for 965 parsa. A parsa is a measure of 4 mil. A mil is roughly a kilometer. So it's roughly 3,860 kilometers that this fish had swam with Yonah, and then that took 3 days, and then spewed him out. God spoke to the fish. And the Gemara tells us there's 3 beings on this world that God spoke to. God spoke to a fish, obviously spoke to the human being, and another animal, a mammal. In the Chumash, God spoke to him, he did something wrong, and God gave the snake. That's right, very good, right? Hashem had a whole dialogue with the snake. So the Gemara actually notes that these 3 mammals, a human being, a snake, and a fish, their mode of procreation is different than other animals. That they are able to do it face to face. An interesting observation the Gemara says about these 3 mammals. Either way, the Midrash tells us that Yonah was in a very sore state when he was spewed out. The Midrash says his clothes were torn, his hair had fallen out, and his skin was all shriveled. He was in a terrible situation, as we can maybe imagine, of being in the belly of a fish. But Yonah was spared, which is a fascinating thing. It may give us a little bit of a glimpse into who Yonah really was. Many of the commentaries ask,
First of all, how did he run away? I mean, God does know what he's saying. No, Yonah ran away because he knew what was better. There was something he couldn't do this, and God didn't punish him. He did, but didn't. He spared him. It's a fascinating. If we think about it a little bit, it's fascinating. It's extremely unique. Somebody on that level. You read through the Chumash. You had people who rebelled against God. Korach. That was it. In those days, when you saw godliness, not like today when somebody does something wrong. Of course, you don't see the splitting of the sea. You don't see the giving of the Torah. You don't see. So today we don't have this kind of treatment, right? But in those days, in the days of the Chumash, you saw what you saw, and still, there was. The measure of inspiration was the measure of the punishment as well. Today we can't relate to that because we don't understand what it means experiencing godliness to know what it means to rebel against it. We have to equate it. That's actually why we don't have today this kind of punishment that we read in the Chumash. We often wonder, so the guy did something religiously wrong, so he was killed. So today it's a different world we live in. This was a prophet. God doesn't speak to me and you. I don't know about you. He doesn't speak to me. So, this was a prophet. God spoke to him. He experienced God firsthand. And went away. Hashem put him through the washing machine. He put him in the water, and let him survive. And didn't go to somebody else. Hey, Yonah, that was a bit of a failure. Someone else would do a better job. Maybe someone else would go to Nineveh. No. Yonah had to go to Nineveh. So we see there was some form. There was many commentaries take it in the way that Yonah was being taught here a lesson. He was being taught something he had to live through, and know that he had to know something. Many commentaries say he had to know that whatever kind of calculation you may make, maybe a very good one, maybe a correct one, but in the end you got to listen. That's what many commentaries say. So God spared him. God didn't punish him because his intention was right. Did God agree with him? Maybe, we're not told. Did God say that? When God told him this, did he secretly, so to say, you say one thing, but that the person has to act differently? Was he testing you? Who knows? We're not told this exactly. At least not in the book itself. What's fascinating is the lesson. Is the fact that Hashem did not destroy Yonah. He allowed Yonah to survive, and Yonah himself was the one who had to go through this. And many of the commentaries take it is that, at the end of the day, when Hashem tells us something, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen through us. The question is only how long it's going to take, and that's many why they say that we read it on Yom Kippur. Not only because we're going to read next time the story of the Teshuvah. That's the obvious concept that the whole Haftarah is about a city that returned, but the story of the lead up of Yonah going through all this, which is half the book, is a very interesting message on its own, and the message is that, as the Rambam tells us. The Rambam says that it's the destiny of the Jewish people is going to be that the people as a whole are going to return, are going to do teshuvah. It says the Torah promised us that the Jewish people the Sof Yisrael last is teshuvah. The end of the Jewish people is going to be that they're going to return to Hashem. So why wait? So why wait? And this is the thing that Yonah was taught. So he wasn't destroyed, probably because his intentions were correct. He wasn't treated as a rebel, wasn't Korach, he wasn't any of these other people, the spies who were, that was it. His intentions were good, and his intentions were for God and for the Jewish people, but at the end of the day you got to listen. That's the Abar Benel, actually, the commentary we mentioned before. This is the sort of lesson he takes from the whole thing. But either way, this is the end of the chapter. Next time, we're going to see how Yonah came to Nineveh and the story afterwards.